I still remember the sound of my birthday cake hitting the floor. The yellow frosting, my favorite since I was a kid, splattered across the hardwood like a crime scene. 18 candles snuffed out instantly. My friends, who moments before had been singing Happy Birthday, froze mid-breath. My mother's face crumpled into that familiar mask of fear I'd grown to hate. And looming over it all was my stepfather, Conrad, his fist still hovering above the table where he'd slammed it down. "This isn't your house anymore, boy. Leave now." His voice didn't just fill the room. It shattered whatever illusions I'd been holding on to for the past decade of my life. That maybe, just maybe, on this day, my 18th birthday, he'd finally look at me and see someone worthy of respect, of belonging. I was wrong. "Conrad, please," my mother whispered, her voice thin as tissue paper. She reached for his arm but stopped short, her fingers curling back into a fist of their own. Not like this. But Conrad wasn't looking at her. His eyes, cold and gray as Portland winter, were locked on mine. "I've put up with you for 18 years, he said, each word precise and cutting. "That's 18 years longer than I ever wanted to." He reached beneath the table and pulled out a white plastic grocery bag, the kind you get free with purchase, the kind that tears easily. He tossed it at my feet. "Your clothes are in there. Whatever else you own, you can come back for when we're not home." My friend Derek moved toward me, his face flushed with anger. "Dude, you can't do that. It's his birthday. Get out," Conrad snapped, not even bothering to look at Derek. "All of you. Party's over." I stood there, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Jamie, who I'd known since 3rd grade. Malik, my lab partner who'd helped me pass chemistry. Even little Sophie, my mother's friend's daughter, who was only 12 but looked at me now with a kind of horrified understanding no child should possess. And my mother, Grace, the woman who gave me life but couldn't find the strength to defend it. She stood trembling, tears streaming silently down her face. "Mom," I said, my voice barely audible. She looked at me, and for just a second I thought she might stand up to him, that she might finally say enough. Instead, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm so sorry." And that's when I knew it was over. Whatever fantasy I'd been nurturing, that we were a real family, that Conrad's coldness was just his way, that one day he'd warm up to me, crumbled like a sandcastle under a cruel wave. I picked up the plastic bag, felt the pathetic weight of my life inside it. A few t-shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, some underwear and socks, my phone charger, not even a toothbrush. "Happy birthday to me," I muttered, and walked toward the door. My friends followed me onto the porch, their voices a chorus of outrage and concern. "Come stay at my place," Derek insisted. "My parents won't mind." "That's messed up, man," Malik said, shaking his head. "He can't just throw you out." But he could. And he did. And somewhere deep inside, I'd always known this day would come. Conrad had never wanted me. I was just the baggage that came with my mother, a living reminder of another man. "I'll be okay," I lied, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "I've got a plan." Another lie. I had nothing but a plastic bag and $18 in birthday money. "Text us," Jamie said, hugging me fiercely. "Promise." I promised. Then I watched them walk to their cars, their headlights cutting through the darkness as the first drops of rain began to fall. Perfect timing for a perfect night. I started walking, not knowing where I was going. The rain quickened, fat drops hammering against my skin, soaking through my thin jacket. Portland in April, unpredictable, unforgiving. Kind of like my life. By the time I reached the end of our street, I was drenched. The plastic bag was already sagging, threatening to tear. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Derek, probably, offering his couch again. Or maybe Mom, finding a moment of courage now that Conrad wasn't watching. I ignored it. Something in me had hardened in that dining room. If they didn't want me, I didn't need them. The rain became a downpour. Water streamed down my face, mixing with tears I refused to acknowledge. Each step took me further from the house I'd lived in for 10 years but had never been allowed to call home. Each raindrop washed away another memory. Conrad's voice cutting me down at every opportunity. My mother's silent apologies. The way I'd learned to make myself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. I was so lost in these thoughts that I barely registered the sleek black car pulling up beside me. It slowed to match my pace, tires hissing on the wet asphalt. The passenger window rolled down smoothly. "Ethan Riley?" a voice called out. I stopped, suddenly alert. Through the rain, I could make out a man's face, Mid-30s maybe, with dark hair and eyes that seemed familiar somehow. Who's asking? My voice sounded stronger than I felt. My name is Callan. His voice was calm, steady, the opposite of how I felt inside. I was sent by the man who is truly your father. For a moment, the world seemed to go silent. Even the rain faded to background noise. What did you just say? Callan leaned forward slightly. Your father, your real father, sent me to find you. His name is Kieran Hayes, and he's been looking for you for 18 years. I stood frozen, rain pounding against my shoulders, my mind spinning. My real father? Mom had mentioned his name exactly once, Kieran, when I was 9 and had asked about the man in the single photograph she kept hidden in her dresser drawer. This is some kind of sick joke, I said, taking a step back. It's not a joke. Callan reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. He held it toward me, protected from the rain by the car door. Look. I hesitated, then stepped closer. The photo showed a young man holding a baby. The man was smiling directly at the camera, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a joy so pure it was almost painful to look at. The baby, me, apparently, was wrapped in a blue blanket, a small hand reaching up toward the man's face. That could be anyone, I said, but my voice wavered. Callan nodded as if he'd expected this reaction. You have a scar above your right eyebrow from when you fell off the porch swing when you were 3. Your mother's maiden name is Hollister, and you're allergic to strawberries. You break out in hives if you eat them. Each detail hit me like a physical blow. Things only someone close to my family would know. How do you— Kieran knows, Callan said simply. He's always known. He's, been trying to reach you for years, but your stepfather made sure that couldn't happen. The rain seemed to grow louder, pounding in my ears along with my heartbeat. I looked back the way I'd come, toward the house where my mother was probably crying, while Conrad told her it was for the best. Then I looked at the photograph again, at the face of a man who held me like I was the most precious thing in his world. Get in, Callan said, pushing open the passenger door. It's time you heard the truth. I stood there, water dripping from my hair into my eyes, clutching my pathetic plastic bag. Every instinct screamed that this was crazy. Getting into a car with a stranger who claimed to know my biological father. It could be dangerous. It could be a lie. But what was my alternative? Walking in? The rain with nowhere to go? Crawling back to Conrad and begging for a roof over my head? I took a deep breath and made the decision that would change everything. I got in the car. The interior of Callan's car smelled like leather and coffee. Heat blasted from the vents, immediately making me aware of just how cold and wet I was. I sat rigidly in the passenger seat, my plastic bag clutched to my chest like a shield. Where are we going? I asked as Callan pulled away from the curb. Just outside the city, he replied, his eyes on the road ahead. Raindrops chased each other across the windshield, distorting the streetlights into blurred stars. Kieran has a place in Forest Heights. Forest Heights, one of Portland's nicer neighborhoods. Not ultra-wealthy, but comfortable. The kind of place where people had actual houses with yards, not the cramped apartments Conrad had shuttled us between whenever he got a better opportunity that somehow never materialized. How do you know him? I ventured, still not entirely convinced this wasn't some elaborate prank, though who would bother pranking the kid who just got thrown out with a grocery bag? Callan glanced at me. I'm his brother-in-law. His sister, my wife Mia, she's been helping him look for you for years. Years, I repeated, tasting the word like something foreign. If he's been looking for me for years, why is tonight the first I'm hearing about it? Callan sighed, his fingers tightening slightly on the steering wheel. It's complicated. Your stepfather, he made things difficult. Legal barriers, restraining. Orders based on false accusations, moving you around whenever Kieran got close. And your mother? Don't talk about my mother, I snapped, a sudden flare of protectiveness surprising even me. Callan nodded. Fair enough. That's between you and her. He paused. But I think you should know that Kieran never stopped trying. Not for a single day since you were born. We drove in silence for a while, the rhythmic sweep of the wipers marking time. My mind raced with questions, with doubt, with a dangerous flicker of hope I was afraid to nurture. I don't understand, I finally said. If he wanted to find me so badly, why wait until my 18th birthday? Why tonight, specifically? Because now you're legally an adult, Callan explained. Conrad can't stop you from seeing Kieran anymore. No. Judge would enforce the restraining order now. And as for tonight? He glanced at me again. We've been watching the house for weeks, waiting for the right moment. When we saw all your friends arrive for a party, we figured it was your birthday. We were going to approach after everyone left, talk to you privately. But then I got thrown out with the trash. I finished for him. Callan's expression softened. I'm sorry you had to go through that, but maybe it was meant to be this way. No more sneaking around. I stared out the window at the passing city. The rain was easing now, the downpour reduced to a gentle patter. The streets glistened under the streetlights, reflecting the world in fractured pieces. Like my life, I thought, broken into before and after. What if I don't want to meet him? I asked, not because I meant it, but because I needed to feel like I had some control over what was happening. Then I'll drive you wherever you want to go, Callan replied without hesitation. A friend's house, a hotel. Kieran left that choice up to you. He said, if he doesn't want to see me, I'll understand. But make sure he's safe. Something about those words, the simple concern, for my safety, with no demands attached, made my throat tighten. I want to hear what he has to say, I decided. But I'm not promising anything. Callan nodded. That's fair. We turned onto the highway, heading west toward the hills that embraced Portland. The city lights fell behind us, and darkness pressed against the windows. I checked my phone, finally. 3 missed calls and 7 texts. All from my friends. Nothing from my mother. I switched it off and tucked it back into my pocket. Tell me about him, I said. About Kieran. Callan seemed to consider his words carefully. He's a good man. Quiet, but not in a brooding way. More like he's always thinking. He teaches literature at Portland State. Loves baseball, can't cook to save his life. He smiled slightly. He talks about you all the time. Has a whole shelf of books he was saving to give you when you were old enough. What kind of books? All kinds. Adventures mostly. The kind of stories where people discover who they really are. I digested this. A literature professor who saved books for a son he couldn't reach. It didn't match any of the scenarios I'd imagined over the years when I'd allowed myself to wonder about my biological father. In my darkest moments, I'd convinced myself he must be a monster, worse than Conrad, for abandoning us. Other times, I'd fantasized he was someone important who'd been forced away, maybe a spy or a witness protection case. Never just a normal man who liked baseball and couldn't cook. Why didn't he and my mom stay together? I asked, the question that had haunted me for years. Colin hesitated. I think that's something you should hear from him. I nodded, strangely grateful for the respect in that answer. No gossip, no taking sides, just recognition that some stories weren't his to tell. The car climbed higher into the hills, winding through forests of tall pines and firs that loomed like sentinels in the darkness. Finally, we turned onto a smaller road, then into a driveway. The headlights swept across a modest house, 2 stories, wood and stone, with warm light glowing from several windows. We're here, Callan said softly. He parked but made no move to get out, giving me time. I stared at the house, trying to process that beyond those walls waited a man who shared my blood, a stranger who was also, somehow, my father. He's nervous too, Callan offered. He's been pacing all day. Changed his shirt 3 times. He smiled. It's kind of endearing, actually. That small detail, the image of a grown man fretting over which shirt to wear to meet his son, made Kieran suddenly, vividly real to me. I took a deep breath. Okay, let's do this. We got out of the car. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving behind a clean, fresh scent. The air was cooler up here, and I shivered in my damp clothes. Callan led the way up a stone path to the front door. Before he could even reach for the handle, the door swung open, and a man stood silhouetted against the light. He was tall, taller than me by a few inches, with broad shoulders and dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. He wore jeans and a simple blue button-down shirt that looked new, but it was his face that stopped me cold. The shape of his jaw, the set of his eyes. It was like looking at an older version of myself. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I could see his chest rise and fall with quick breaths, could see the way his hands opened and closed at his sides, as if he wasn't sure what to do with them. Ethan, he said finally, his voice deep and slightly hoarse. Just that one word, my name, but it carried 18 years of waiting. Kieran? I replied, my voice smaller than I intended. He nodded, swallowing hard. Then, with visible effort, he stepped back from the doorway. Please, he said. Come inside. I hesitated, suddenly aware of how I must look, soaking wet, carrying a plastic bag, probably red-eyed from crying in the rain, even though I'd deny it if asked. But the way Kieran looked at me, like I was something precious that had been lost and found, gave me the courage to step forward, to cross the threshold from my old life into something unknown. I walked through the door, still clutching my pathetic grocery bag, still dripping rainwater onto his floor. And somehow, impossibly, it felt like coming home. The inside of Kieran's house was exactly what you'd expect from a literature professor. Bookshelves lining nearly every wall, comfortable furniture that looked lived in rather than showcased, and a faint scent of coffee and old paper. But what caught my eye immediately wasn't the decor. It was the photographs. They were everywhere, framed on side tables, arranged on walls, perched on bookshelves, and in every single one, there was a little boy at different ages, a toddler on a swing, a kindergartner missing his front teeth, a 9-year-old in a baseball cap, a teenager with braces. It took me a moment to realize I was looking at myself. How? I whispered, moving closer to one of the frames. It showed me at about 7, playing in a park I recognized near our old apartment. Kieran stood awkwardly by the door, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I hired someone, he admitted, a photographer who'd follow at a distance, just once or twice a year to see how you were growing. I know it sounds creepy, I offered. I was going to say desperate, he said with a sad smile. But yes, probably that too. Strangely, I wasn't disturbed by the revelation. These weren't invasive shots through bedroom windows, just moments of a normal childhood, captured from afar. The kind of photos any parent might take, except my actual parent wasn't allowed to be there. You're soaked, Kieran observed, seeming to notice my condition for the first time. Let me get you something dry to wear. He disappeared upstairs while Callan excused himself to the kitchen, tactfully giving us space. I stood alone, in the living room, water dripping from my clothes onto the hardwood floor, still taking in the surreal sight of my life documented by a father I'd never known. Kieran returned quickly with a stack of clothes, a Portland State sweatshirt, flannel pajama pants, thick socks. Bathrooms down the hall if you want to change, he said, handing me the pile. There's a dryer too if you want to toss your, wet things in. Thanks, I mumbled, taking the clothes. Our fingers brushed during the exchange, and I felt a strange jolt. This was the first time I'd touched my biological father, or at least the first time I could remember. In the bathroom, I peeled off my wet clothes and changed into Kieran's offerings. The sweatshirt was too big, the sleeves hanging past my hands, but it was warm and soft. I caught my reflection in the mirror, pale, hollow-eyed, hair still dripping, and tried to see Kieran in my features, the shape of the eyebrows, the angle of the jaw. How had I never noticed before that I looked nothing like Conrad? When I emerged, Kieran was waiting in the living room with 2 steaming mugs. Hot chocolate, he explained, offering one to me. I remembered your allergy to strawberries, so nothing with that. I wasn't sure what else you might. He stopped himself. Sorry, I'm nervous. That makes 2 of us, I admitted, accepting the mug. The warmth seeped into my palms. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, an ocean of cushion between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. What do you say to the father you've never known? Or the son who doesn't know you? I have questions, I finally said. Kieran nodded. I'd be worried if you didn't. Why didn't you fight harder? The question burst from me with more force than I intended. If you wanted to be in my life so badly, why didn't you just, show up at my school? Or call me? Or, I tried, Kieran interrupted, his voice tight with emotion. God, Ethan, I tried everything. The first restraining order came when you were 2. Your stepfather claimed I was unstable, dangerous. He had witnesses, friends who lied for him. By the time I got it overturned, you'd moved. No forwarding address. He took a ragged breath. Every time I got close, Conrad would file new accusations, new restraining orders, move to a new place. Your mother changed her phone number constantly. I hired lawyers, private investigators, for years. He rubbed his face. The system that's supposed to protect families, it can also be weaponized against them. I stared into my hot chocolate, watching the tiny marshmallows dissolve. And my mom? Was she part of this? Pain flashed across Kieran's face. Grace and I? We were young. Too young, maybe. She got pregnant with you during our first year of college. We were happy, terrified, but committed to making it work. Then her father died suddenly. She was devastated, vulnerable. That's when Conrad appeared, offering stability, security, things I couldn't provide as a broke student. He sighed. By the time I realized what was happening, they were married, and he had convinced her I was a threat, that I was unstable, obsessed. He isolated her. Gradually. Classic tactics. You're saying he brainwashed her? I asked skeptically. I'm saying he manipulated her when she was at her lowest, Kieran corrected gently. And once she was in deep enough, it became harder and harder for her to see a way out. I thought about my mother, always walking on eggshells, always trying to placate Conrad. The way her voice would change when he entered a room, becoming higher, tighter, how she'd flinch sometimes at sudden movements. He hurts her, I said quietly. Not physically, at least I don't think so, but in other ways. Kieran's expression darkened. I've suspected as much for years. It's why I never gave up trying to reach you both. I noticed a folder on the coffee table, thick with papers. Kieran followed my gaze. Evidence, he explained. Court documents, private investigator reports, letters I wrote that came back unopened, records of every attempt I made to contact you. He pushed it toward me. It's all there if you want to see it. I didn't touch the folder. Couldn't yet. It was too much. The tangible proof of a lifetime of effort I'd known nothing about. When I was 9, I said instead, I found a photo of you. Just one. Mom kept it hidden in her dresser drawer. When I asked her about it, she told me your name, but then she started crying and made me promise never to mention it again. That was the only time we ever talked about you. Kieran's eyes glistened. She kept a photo? I nodded. You were young, holding a baseball. Our first date, he said softly. A Mariners game. She caught me off guard with her camera. I hate having my picture taken. That's why you're squinting in it, I realized. I always thought you looked angry. Not angry, he corrected. Just surprised, and probably squinting into the sun. He hesitated. The fact that she kept it all these years, maybe part of her was resisting Conrad's control in her own way. I wanted to believe that my mother had harbored some secret resistance all this time. It was easier than facing the alternative, that she had chosen Conrad over me, time and again. She didn't stop him tonight, I said, my voice hardening. She just stood there while he threw me out like garbage. Kieran leaned forward, his eyes intent on mine. Tell me what happened. All of it. So I did. The birthday party. The cake hitting the floor. Conrad's coldness. The plastic bag. My mother's silence. With each detail, Kieran's expression grew more pained, his hands curling into fists on his knees. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I'm so sorry, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. No parent should ever... He trailed off, swallowing hard. But I swear to you, Ethan, if you'll let me, I will spend every day trying to make up for the years we lost. The rawness in his voice, the naked hope in his eyes. It was almost too much to bear. This man, this stranger who was somehow not a stranger, had been fighting for me my entire life. While Conrad had been looking for excuses to get rid of me, Kieran had been desperately trying to reach me. I don't know how to have a father, I admitted. A real one, I mean. And I don't know how to father an 18-year-old, Kieran replied with a small smile. Maybe we can figure it out together? Before I could answer, Callan appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but it's getting late and Mia's expecting me. He turned to me. It was good to meet you, Ethan. I hope we'll see more of each other. After he left, the house seemed quieter, more intimate. Just me and the father I never knew I had. You can stay here, Kieran offered, gesturing to the stairs. There's a guest room that's, well, it was always meant to be your room, if you want it, or I can take you somewhere else if that's what you prefer. I looked around at the photographs charting a childhood observed from a distance, at the folder full of evidence of a father's relentless effort, at Kieran himself, now watching me with nervous anticipation. I'd like to stay, I said finally, just for tonight, until I figure things out. The relief on Kieran's face was like sunrise breaking through clouds. Your room is upstairs, he said. First door on the left. The room that was meant to be mine wasn't what I expected. I'd imagined something generic, a blank slate waiting to be filled. Instead, I opened the door to a space that had clearly been created with me in mind. The walls were a deep blue, lined with bookshelves stuffed with novels, comics, and science books. A desk sat beneath the window with a good lamp and a comfortable chair. The bed had a navy comforter that looked new. But the shelves held objects that had clearly been there for years. A collection of baseball cards, model airplanes, a telescope, vintage comic books still in protective sleeves. On the wall hung a poster for a Space Museum exhibition from 2014, and beside it, a framed first edition of The Hobbit. Everything a boy might want in his room, if that boy loved reading, space, and adventure, which I did. I kept adding things over the years, Kieran said from the doorway behind me, guessing at what you might like based on those glimpses I got. You guessed well, I admitted, running my fingers over the spines of books I'd never read, but somehow knew I would love. The comics were a risk, he said with a self-deprecating smile. But I saw you reading one in the park when you were 12, so I turned to face him, overwhelmed by the evidence of how much thought, how much love had gone into a room for a child who had never slept there, who had never even known it existed. Why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why go to all this trouble for someone who might never see it? Kieran leaned against the door frame, considering his answer carefully. When I was younger, it was hope, I suppose. The belief that somehow, someday, the truth would come out. That you would find your way here. His expression softened. As the years passed, it became something else. A kind of prayer, maybe, or a promise. That no matter how long it took, I would be ready when you needed me. The lump in my throat made it hard to speak. I turned away, pretending to examine a model of the solar system on one of the shelves. There are clothes in the dresser, Kieran continued, giving me space. They might be a bit small. I bought them last year based on those photos. And the bathroom has everything you should need. If there's anything missing, just let me know. I nodded, still not trusting my voice. I'll let you get some rest, he said. It's been quite a day for you. He hesitated. Good night, Ethan. Good night, I managed, finally turning back. But Kieran was already gone, the door left slightly ajar as if to say I could close it or leave it open. My choice. Alone, I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. This morning, I'd woken up excited about my birthday, about finally being an adult, about the small party my mother had helped me plan despite Conrad's obvious disapproval. Now, I was sitting in a room that had been waiting for me for 18 years, in the house of a father I hadn't known existed in any meaningful way. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I'd turned it back on without really thinking about it. A text from Derek. Dude, where are you? We're all worried sick. Please tell me you're okay. I stared at the screen, unsure how to even begin explaining what had happened. Finally, I typed, I'm safe, found a place to stay. We'll explain tomorrow. Seconds later, thank God. Need anything? We can bring stuff. The simplicity of the offer, the unquestioning support, made my eyes sting. I'm good for tonight. Thanks. I set the phone on the nightstand and noticed a framed photograph I hadn't seen before. It showed a young Kieran holding a baby, me, on what looked like a hospital bed. My mother was there too, looking exhausted but radiant, her hand on Kieran's arm as they both gazed down at the tiny bundle between them. A family. We had been a family once. I picked up the frame, studying the joy on their young faces. Whatever had happened later, in that moment, both of my parents had loved me, had wanted me. Setting the photo down, I began to explore the room more thoroughly. Each drawer, each shelf revealed new surprises. All the things Kieran thought his son might like or need. Baseball gloves in progressively larger sizes. A collection of seashells from various beaches. Comics ranging from kid-friendly to more mature graphic novels, carefully selected to match the age I would have been when he added them. In the desk drawer, I found a stack of birthday cards. 18 of them. Each signed simply, Love, Dad. Each sealed in its envelope, never sent but preserved. Waiting. I didn't open them. Couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I crawled into the bed that should have been mine for years, pulled the covers over my head, and finally let myself cry. Not from sadness or anger, but from the overwhelming realization that I had never been unwanted. I had been stolen. When I woke, the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the window. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came rushing back. Conrad, the plastic bag, the rain, Callan, Kieran. The smell of coffee and something baking drifted up from downstairs. I checked my phone. 7:43 a.m. There were more texts from friends, but nothing from my mother. I wasn't surprised, just disappointed. The dresser yielded jeans that were slightly too short and a t-shirt that was a little tight across the shoulders, but they were clean and dry. In the adjoining bathroom, I found a new toothbrush still in its packaging, toothpaste, deodorant, everything I needed, waiting. Downstairs, I found Kieran in the kitchen, standing over a pan of what looked like extremely burnt bacon. He was, though, cursing under his breath, trying to scrape the charred remains into the trash. "Morning," I said, hovering in the doorway. He looked up, startled, then embarrassed. "I, thought I'd make breakfast," he said, gesturing helplessly at the disaster on the stove. Turns out Callan wasn't exaggerating about my cooking skills. Or lack thereof, I observed, surprising myself with how easy it felt to joke with him. Kieran laughed, a warm, genuine sound that somehow seemed familiar. "There's cereal in the pantry," he offered, "and I can manage toast without burning the house down, usually." "Toast is good," I said, sliding onto a stool at the kitchen counter. "And coffee, if there's enough." "There's always enough coffee," he assured me, pouring a mug and sliding it across the counter. "Milk's in the fridge if you want it. Sugar's there." He pointed to a small container. "Black is fine," I said, though I usually took it with both. Something about the moment made me want to seem more grown up, more like him. We ate breakfast in a surprisingly comfortable silence. Outside, the morning was clear and bright. The storm of the previous night washed away completely. Through the kitchen window, I could see a backyard with tall trees and a small garden. "So," Kieran said finally, setting down his coffee, "what would you like to do today?" The question caught me off guard. "Do? Well," he said carefully, "you could rest here if you want. Or I could show you around the neighborhood. Or we could go somewhere. Anywhere you'd like. Or," he hesitated, "or I could take you back to your friends or to your mother's if that's what you want." The mention of my mother brought reality crashing back. "I should probably let my friends know I'm okay," I said. "They were pretty worried last night." Kieran nodded. "Of course. You can invite them here if you like." "Really?" "This is your house too, Ethan," he said simply. "Or it can be, if you want it to be." The offer hung in the air. Between us. Not just of a place to stay, but of a home, a father, a family. "I don't know what I want yet," I admitted. "Everything's happening so fast." "There's no rush," Kieran assured me. "You can take all the time you need to figure things out. I've waited 18 years, I can wait a bit longer." The patience in his voice, the understanding. It was so different from Conrad's constant demands and disappointments. So different from my mother's anxious need to smooth everything over, to pretend problems didn't exist. "Thank you," I said, then gathering my courage. "I'd like to know more about you, about us, about what happened." Kieran nodded. "Ask me anything. I promise I'll tell you the truth, even when it's not pretty." And for the first time in my life, I believed a father's promise. "Start at the beginning," I said, refilling my coffee cup. "How did you and Mom meet?" Kieran smiled, his eyes taking on that distant look people get when they're traveling back in time. First day of freshman orientation at Portland State, fall 2005. We were in the same group tour. Your mother kept asking these incredibly insightful questions about the literature program while I was too nervous to say anything at all. He chuckled. After the tour, she walked right up to me and said, "You're in the literature track too, right? Want to grab coffee and compare schedules?" Mom did that? Just approached a stranger? It didn't match the cautious woman I knew. Grace was fearless back then, Kieran said softly. Brilliant, confident, ambitious. She was going to become a professional editor. Had it all mapped out. I tried to reconcile this description with my mother, a woman who could barely order at a restaurant without looking to Conrad for approval first. What happened to her plans? Kieran's expression darkened. Life, pregnancy, Conrad, he sighed. But before all that, we had almost 2 perfect years together. We moved into a tiny apartment off campus after freshman year. It had terrible heating and the neighbors played death metal at 3 a.m., but it was ours. We were so happy, Ethan. And then I happened, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. And then you happened, he agreed, but there was no resentment in his tone, only warmth. The best surprise of our lives. We were terrified, of course, 20 years old, barely able to afford ramen, but we were determined to make it work. He stood up, gesturing for me to follow him into the living room, where he pulled a worn photo album from a bookshelf. We sat side by side on the couch as he opened it. The first page showed my mother, younger, radiant, her hand resting on a slightly rounded belly. Her smile was brighter than I'd ever seen it. Beside her stood Kieran, looking nervous, but unmistakably happy, his arm around her waist. 7 months pregnant, Kieran explained. We just found out you were a boy. That night, we stayed up until dawn arguing about names. Page after page told the story of a young couple preparing for their child, a nursery being painted, baby clothes laid out on a second-hand crib, my mother growing rounder, more luminous with each photograph. Then came the day you were born, Kieran continued, turning to a series of hospital photos, the ones I'd seen in my room, plus dozens more. March 12th, 2006, 36 hours of labor. Your mother was incredible, strongest person I've ever known. He pointed to a photo of himself holding a tiny red-faced bundle. First time I held you. I was terrified I'd break you. You were so small, but you had this fierce grip. His voice caught. You wrapped your little hand around my finger and just held on. That was it for me. I was yours forever in that moment. The photos continued, documenting the first 6 months of my life. Me sleeping on Kieran's chest. Mom nursing me in a rocking chair. The three of us at a park, at the beach, in our small apartment. A family. Then, abruptly, the photos stopped. What happened? I asked, though I already knew the answer would involve Conrad. Kieran closed the album carefully. Your grandfather, your mother's father, died suddenly. Heart attack. Grace was devastated. They'd been incredibly close, especially after her mother left when she was young. She took a semester off to deal with the grief. I picked up extra shifts at the campus bookstore to keep us afloat. He leaned back on the couch, his face tightening with the memory. That's when Conrad entered the picture. He was her father's former business partner, swooped in to help with the estate, the funeral arrangements, everything. He was older, established, financially secure, all the things I wasn't. And Mom fell for him? Not romantically, I don't think. Not at first. But she was vulnerable, grieving. He positioned himself as a paternal figure, someone who could take care of her the way her father had. Kieran's jaw tensed. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd convinced her that our life together was unstable, that I couldn't provide properly for you, that you deserved better than a struggling student father. That's messed up, I muttered. It was calculated, Kieran corrected. Conrad saw something he wanted, your mother, and methodically removed the obstacles, namely, me. He drew a deep breath. The day I came home to find you both gone nearly destroyed me. Just a note saying she needed space to think. A week later, I was served with a temporary restraining order. Conrad had convinced her I was unstable, potentially violent. But that's a lie, I protested. You're the least violent person I've ever met. The certainty in my voice surprised us both. How could I be so sure about a man I'd only known for less than a day? Yet somehow I was. Kieran smiled sadly. Thank you for that. But at the time, your mother believed it, or at least she convinced herself she did. Conrad had planted enough seeds of doubt during her vulnerable moments, twisted my words, my actions, made normal frustrations sound like dangerous instability. And then they got married, I said, filling in the timeline. 6 months later, I wasn't invited. His attempt at humor fell flat. By then, the temporary restraining order had been dismissed for lack of evidence, but Conrad's lawyer, who later became his business partner, was good. They used the legal system to keep me away, filing new motions whenever I got close. But you had rights, as my father. I did, and I fought for them. For years. He gestured to the thick folder on the coffee table. Every penny I had went to lawyers. But each time I'd make progress, Conrad would move you both, change phone numbers, file new accusations. The cycle continued until I was 18, I finished, and legally able to make my own decisions. Kieran nodded. Even then, I wasn't sure how to approach you. I was afraid you'd been told terrible things about me. Or worse, told I was dead or had abandoned you. I didn't want to just show up and destroy your world. So you sent Callan to watch for an opportunity. Yes, though the original plan was much less dramatic than him picking you. Up in a rainstorm after you'd been thrown out. Kieran's expression hardened. I still can't believe Conrad did that to you. On your birthday, no less. I thought about the plastic bag, the cake on the floor, my mother's silence. It was always coming, I said quietly. Conrad never wanted me around. I was just the baggage that came with Mom. You were never baggage, Ethan, Kieran said fiercely. You are a gift. Conrad's too blind and selfish to see that. He hesitated. And your mother? She's not the woman she was. I think part of her died with her father, and Conrad made sure it stayed buried. A thought struck me. You still care about her, don't you? After everything. Kieran considered this carefully. I care about the Grace I knew, the mother of my child, the woman who loved poetry and dreamed of editing the next great American novel. This Grace, Conrad's Grace, is someone I barely recognize. He paused. But yes, I would help her in a heartbeat if she asked. Not because I'm still in love with her, but because no one deserves to live under someone's control like that. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 18 years of separation heavy between us. I have her eyes, I said suddenly. Kieran smiled. You do? And her laugh. That's one of the things I loved most about her. Her laugh could fill a room. I've barely heard her laugh in years, I admitted. That's what men like Conrad do, Kieran said softly. They take light and convince it to dim itself. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Checking in. Still good? My friend, I explained to Kieran. Making sure I'm okay. Good friend, he observed. You should answer. I typed quickly. All good. Long story, but I'm with my biological father. Yes, really. We'll explain later. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, what the actual fine? Call me. Despite everything, I laughed. I think I should call him before he has a coronary. Kieran nodded. Of course. Use the back deck if you want privacy. It's nice out there. I headed for the sliding glass door, then paused. When I'm done, I want to read those birthday cards, if that's okay. Something like hope flickered across Kieran's face. They're yours, Ethan. They always were. Outside on the deck, sunlight warmed my face as I called Derek. The conversation was predictably chaotic. Disbelief, excited interruptions, rapid-fire questions. I gave him the condensed version, promising more details when we met in person. Dude, Derek said finally, this is like something out of a movie. Are you sure this guy is legit? I glanced through the glass door to where Kieran sat, leafing through the photo album we just explored together. Yeah, I said with sudden certainty. He's legit. As I ended the call, I realized something significant had shifted inside me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't dreading going back inside to face a father figure. I was looking forward to it. I spent the rest of the morning reading 18 birthday cards that had never been delivered. Each one contained a message appropriate to the age I would have been. Simple words for a child, more complex thoughts for a teenager. Kieran had written about his hopes for me, his pride in the person I might be becoming, his unwavering love despite our separation. The most recent one, meant for my 18th birthday, contained a key. To the house that's always been yours, the card read. Whether you use it tomorrow or years from now or never at all, there will always be a place for you here. I clutched the key in my palm, its metal edges pressing into my skin. Such a small thing, yet so monumental in what it represented. Unconditional welcome, unconditional love. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion, for never giving up. Kieran nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then, clearing his throat, Are you hungry? I can't cook, but I make an excellent phone call to the pizza place down the street. Pizza sounds perfect, I agreed, grateful for the shift to something more normal. This emotional roller coaster was exhausting. While we waited for the food to arrive, I explored the house more thoroughly. It wasn't large or fancy, but it was thoughtfully arranged. Bookshelves everywhere, comfortable places to read, windows that let in plenty of light. In Kieran's study, I found framed degrees on the wall, his bachelor's from Portland State, a master's and PhD from University of Oregon. Professor Hayes, I read from a faculty award plaque. Department of English Literature. My students call me Dr. Hayes, he said from the doorway. My colleagues call me Kieran. My publisher calls me the guy who's late with his manuscript. You write books? Academic texts mostly, he said with a self-deprecating shrug. Analyses of modernist poetry that approximately 12 people in the world care about. And a novel I've been working on for about a decade, but will probably never finish. I noticed a class schedule pinned to a corkboard. Do you have to teach today? I called in, Kieran said. Asked a colleague to cover my classes. Some things are more important than discussing Eliot's. The wasteland with sleepy undergrads. The doorbell rang. Pizza delivery. Over lunch, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me. What happens now? With us, I mean. Kieran set down his slice. That's entirely up to you, Ethan. Legally, you're an adult. You can stay here as long as you want. Permanently, if that's what you choose. This is your home. Or you can return to your mother's. Or find another arrangement entirely. I won't pressure you either way. And if I stay? Then we figure out what that looks like. Your education, I assume you're finishing high school this year? I nodded. 2 months until graduation. We'd need to handle the transfer paperwork if you want to finish at a school closer to here. Or you could stay at your current school if you prefer. I can drive you. Or we can look into other transportation options. He paused. But that's just logistics. The important thing is that you feel comfortable, safe, and wanted. And after graduation, college, if that's what you want, or a gap year, or work. Whatever path feels right to you. I'll support your decision either way. The lack of pressure was both liberating and dizzying. Conrad had definite opinions. About everything in my life, from what classes I should take to what career I should pursue. Even my mother, in her gentle way, pushed me toward practical choices. Kieran's open-ended support was foreign territory. I was thinking about studying literature, I admitted. Maybe creative writing. But Conrad always said that was a waste of time. Conrad, Kieran said with careful neutrality, is entitled to his opinion. But it's your life, not his. The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing. My mother's name flashed on the screen. It's Mom, I said, feeling suddenly anxious. Do you want privacy? Kieran asked. I shook my head. Stay, please. Taking a deep breath, I answered. Hello? Ethan? My mother's voice was high, panicked. Where are you? Are you safe? I've been worried sick. The concern felt genuine, but also late. Really? Because you didn't call or text last night when Conrad was throwing me out. Or this morning. I'm sorry, honey. I'm so sorry. Conrad took my phone. I only just got to use the landline at work. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Please come home. We can work this out. Home? I repeated, anger surging unexpectedly. The place. Where I got tossed out with my stuff in a plastic grocery bag on my birthday? That home? He didn't mean it, she pleaded. He was just upset. You know how he gets, but he's calmed down now. Is that what he told you to say? Silence then. Where are you staying? Derek's? I can come get you. I'm with my father, I said simply. My real father, Kieran. The silence that followed was absolute. I could almost see her face, the shock, the fear, the recognition that her carefully constructed world was unraveling. That's not possible, she finally whispered. How did you— He found me, Mom. Or rather, he sent someone to find me after Conrad kicked me out in the rain. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Turns out he's been looking for me for 18 years while you've been pretending he doesn't exist. Ethan, you don't understand. Kieran is right here, I interrupted. Would you like to speak to him? Without waiting for her answer, I handed the phone to Kieran, who took it with visible apprehension. Hello, Grace, he said quietly. I couldn't hear her response, but Kieran's expression shifted through a range of emotions. Pain, anger, resignation, and finally, something like compassion. He's safe, he assured her. And yes, he can stay as long as he wants. A pause. No, I didn't plan this. But I'm not sorry it happened. Another longer pause. That's not true. And I think you know it. He glanced at me. I understand you're afraid, but this isn't about you or me or Conrad. It's about Ethan and what he needs right now. The conversation continued for several minutes, their voices too low for me to catch everything. I watched Kieran's face, the softening around his eyes, the way he listened more than he spoke. Finally, he said, He has my number now. And yes, I'll make sure he stays in school. One last pause. I know, Grace. I know. Then he handed the phone back to me. Ethan? My mother's voice sounded fragile, defeated. I know you're angry. With me. You have every right to be. Just be careful and call me, please. I will, I promised, surprising myself with how much I meant it despite my anger. I'm not disappearing, Mom, unlike some people. The barb hit its mark. She inhaled sharply. I love you, she said. I know, I replied, but couldn't bring myself to say it back. Not yet. I'll call you later. After hanging up, I saw at Kieran. What did she say to you? He seemed to consider his words carefully. She's afraid. Of losing you. Of Conrad's reaction when he finds out where you are. Of what you must think of her now. Is she afraid of him? I asked bluntly. Of Conrad? Kieran's expression was grave. Yes. She didn't say it directly, but yes, I believe she is. The confirmation of what I'd long suspected settled heavily in my chest. Then why stay with him? Why let him control everything? Even her relationship with her own son. Fear is a powerful prison, Ethan. And the longer you're locked inside, the harder it is to believe you can escape. He paused. Your mother made choices I don't agree with. Choices that hurt both of us deeply. But I don't think she made them out of malice. I think she made them out of fear and the belief that she had no alternatives. His capacity for empathy toward the woman who had kept his son from him for 18 years was startling. You're a better person than I am, I muttered. I'm not sure I could be that understanding. Kieran smiled sadly. I've had 18 years to work through my anger, my hurt, and the older I got, the more I realized that holding onto bitterness was only hurting me, and by extension, hurting my chances of ever reconnecting with you. He reached out hesitantly, then placed his hand on my shoulder. Our first real contact beyond that brief touch when he'd handed me the clothes. The question now is, what do you want to do? After talking to your mother, has anything changed for you? I considered this seriously. Had anything changed? My mother was clearly upset, clearly wanted me back, but she'd also had the chance to stand up for me last night and had chosen silence instead. And now she was back to making excuses for Conrad, just as she always had. Meanwhile, here was Kieran, a father who had never stopped trying to reach me, who had created a home and a room and a life with space for me in it, who offered unconditional support without demands or expectations. The answer was suddenly, blindingly clear. I want to stay, I said firmly. Here, with you, at least until I figure out what comes next. The relief on Kieran's face was profound, but he tried to temper it. Are you sure? This is a big decision. I'm sure that I'm not going back to Conrad's, I replied. And I'm sure that I want to get to know my real father. I fingered the key I'd slipped into my pocket, the one who never gave up on me. For the first time since I'd met him, Kieran Hayes, my father, broke down and cried. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, school transfers, and gradual adjustments to my new reality. Kieran helped me navigate the administrative labyrinth of changing schools with only 2 months left in my senior year. We found a good compromise. I would complete most coursework remotely, but attend my original school for major exams and graduation. It wasn't ideal, but it meant I wouldn't lose any credits or delay graduation. I texted with my mother daily, but hadn't seen her in person. She was careful not to push, perhaps sensing that I needed space. From her messages, I gathered that Conrad was furious about my whereabouts, but was maintaining a cold silence on the subject, rather than actively trying to bring me back. Small mercies. My friends visited the following weekend, filling Kieran's usually quiet house with the chaos of teenage energy. Derek, Malik, and Jamie arrived with my Xbox, more clothes, and the birthday presents I'd never opened. They circled Kieran cautiously at first, like wolves assessing a newcomer to their territory. So you're really Ethan's dad? Derek asked bluntly as we all sat around the living room. Like, biologically? Last I checked, Kieran replied with good humor. And you've been looking for him this whole time? Malik pressed. For 18 years? Yes. Jamie, always the most perceptive of my friends, studied the photographs on the walls. You documented his whole life from a distance. Kieran nodded. As much as I could. That's either incredibly devoted or incredibly creepy, Jamie decided. I haven't made up my mind which yet. Fair assessment, Kieran acknowledged with a laugh. I've wondered the same thing myself many times. His honesty seemed to win them over. By the end of the evening, Derek was discussing baseball statistics. With him, Malik was borrowing books from his extensive collection, and Jamie was extracting a promise that he'd review her college application essays. Your dad's cool, Derek told me later as they were leaving. Like, actually cool, not trying to be cool. Yeah, I agreed, the word dad, settling comfortably in my mouth for the first time in my life. After my friends left, Kieran and I fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Mornings began with coffee, which I'd admitted I preferred with milk and sugar, much to his amusement. He would work on his latest academic paper or novel while I completed my remote schoolwork. Evenings often found us discussing books, watching baseball, or exploring Portland's neighborhoods, Kieran showing me his favorite spots while I introduced him to mine. It wasn't perfect. We had moments of awkwardness, of not knowing how to navigate this father-son relationship that had been thrust upon us fully formed, with no gradual buildup of shared history. But we were trying, learning, building something new from the ground up. Then, 3 weeks after I moved in, my mother called. I've left Conrad, she said simply when I answered. I sat down, hard on my bed. What? When? Are you okay? Yesterday. Her voice was different, steadier than I'd heard it in years. And no, I'm not okay. I'm terrified and homeless and staying in a motel with only 2 suitcases to my name. But I'm also more okay than I've been in 18 years. What happened? I asked, motioning to Kieran, who had appeared in my doorway with concern etched on his face. You... happened, Ethan. She took a deep breath. Seeing you walk away, watching Conrad discard you like that, something broke in me. Or maybe something finally woke up. Her voice caught. And then hearing your voice when you were with Kieran, you sounded different, stronger. It made me realize how much I've lost, how much I've let Conrad take from both of us. I put the phone on speaker so Kieran could hear. Where are you now? I asked. The Sunset Motel on Powell. It's not great, but it's what I could afford. She paused. Conrad froze our joint accounts when he realized I was leaving. I managed to withdraw some cash before he could stop me completely, but it won't last long. Kieran and I exchanged glances. He nodded slightly. Mom, I said cautiously, would you like to come here? Just to talk, I added quickly. Silence stretched across the line. Is Kieran there with you now? She finally asked. Yes. May I speak with him? Privately? I handed Kieran the phone and stepped into the hallway, giving them privacy but unable to go far. Their conversation was too quiet for me to make out words, but I caught the tone. Serious, measured, occasionally tense, but not hostile. After about 10 minutes, Kieran emerged from my room and handed the phone back. She's coming over, he said simply. She'll be here in about an hour. Is that okay? With you, I mean. His expression was complicated, a mixture of old pain and new resolve. It's necessary, he said finally. For all of us. While we waited, Kieran made a spare bedroom ready, ignoring my protests that we didn't know if she'd be staying. Better to be prepared, he said, putting fresh sheets on the bed. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. When the doorbell rang, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Kieran squeezed my shoulder reassuringly before we went to answer it. My mother stood on the porch, looking smaller than I remembered. She'd lost weight, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. But there was something else different about her. A straightness to her spine, a directness in her gaze that I hadn't seen in years. Hi, she said simply, her eyes moving from me to Kieran and back again. Hi, Mom, I replied, stepping forward to take one of her bags. She hesitated, then pulled me into a fierce hug. I'm so sorry, she whispered into my ear. I failed you, over and over again. I held her awkwardly, unsure what to say. Over her shoulder, I saw Kieran watching us, his expression unreadable. Come inside, he said finally. It's getting cold out here. We moved to the living room, the three of us forming a triangle of complicated history and raw emotions. My mother sat perched on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Thank you for letting me come, she said to Kieran. I know you have no reason to want me in your home. You're Ethan's mother, he replied simply. That's reason enough. She nodded, blinking back tears. I don't even know where to begin. How about with what happened yesterday? I suggested. You said you left Conrad? Just like that? She gave a hollow laugh. Not just like that. It's been building for years. But yes, yesterday was the breaking point. She twisted the wedding band she still wore. He was ranting about you, about how ungrateful you were, how he'd always known you'd turn out to be trouble. And suddenly, I couldn't bear it anymore. Couldn't bear his voice, his control, his hatred for the person I love most in this world. She looked directly at me. I told him he was wrong about you, that you were brilliant and kind and stronger than either of us, that if anyone should leave, it should be him. Her voice hardened. He didn't like that. Did he hurt you? Kieran asked sharply, leaning forward. She hesitated. Not physically, not this time, but the threat was there. It's always been there. Instead, he told me that if I thought you were so perfect, I could go live with you and that pathetic excuse for a father. Instead, her eyes met Kieran's. His words, not mine. And you left, I said, a surge of pride warming my chest. I packed what I could while he was at work today and called a taxi, left my keys and my wedding ring on the kitchen counter. She gave a shaky smile. 18 years too late, but I finally found my courage. It's never too late, Kieran said quietly, to do the right thing. My mother looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in nearly 2 decades. You've changed, Kieran. We all have, Grace. Not all for the worse, it seems, she said softly. Then turning to me, I don't expect forgiveness, Ethan. Not right away. Maybe not ever. But I hope you'll give me a chance to be the mother you deserved all along. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hug her and tell her everything would be okay now. Another part, the part still raw from the memory of her silence while Conrad threw me out, wanted to keep my distance, protect myself from further disappointment. I think, Kieran said into the silence, that we all need time. Time to heal, to rebuild, to figure out what comes next. He glanced at me, then back to my mother. Grace, you're welcome to stay here while you get back on your feet. The guest room is ready. But I want to be clear. This is primarily for Ethan's benefit. He deserves to have both his parents in his life, if that's what he wants. I nodded, grateful for his understanding. I'd like that, Mom. For you to stay. For a while, at least. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. Both of you. She looked around. At the photographs covering the walls, the documentation of my life that Kieran had assembled from a distance. I have so much to make up for. To both of you. We all have healing to do, Kieran said. But tonight, let's just focus on the fact that for the first time in 18 years, we're all under the same roof. The rest can wait until morning. As I looked at my mother and father, together in the same room, fragile but trying, I felt something inside me shift and settle. The family I'd always longed for had never been the one Conrad tried to create. It had been waiting here all along, broken, but not beyond repair. 2 months passed in a delicate dance of rebuilding. My mother stayed in the guest room, gradually reclaiming pieces of herself that Conrad had stripped away over the years. She found a job at a local bookstore. Not the editing career she'd once dreamed of, but a start. She stopped flinching at sudden movements. Started laughing again. Not often, but when she did, it filled the room just as Kieran had described. Conrad, predictably, didn't go quietly. There were angry phone calls, threats of legal action over shared property, even one particularly nasty confrontation, when he showed up at Kieran's house unannounced. But each time, we faced him as a united front. Kieran calm and immovable, my mother steadily reclaiming her voice, me no longer the frightened boy desperate for approval. You'll regret this, Conrad had spat during his unwelcome visit, his face mottled with rage. All of you. The only thing I regret, my mother had replied with quiet dignity, is not leaving sooner. He'd stormed off after that, and the divorce proceedings continued through lawyers rather than direct confrontation. Small victories. Graduation day arrived bright and clear. I'd completed all my coursework, maintained my GPA despite the upheaval, and was set to attend Portland State in the fall. A decision I'd made on my own, though the fact that my father taught there was, admittedly, a bonus. As I adjusted my cap in the mirror, a knock came at my bedroom door. Come in, I called. My mother entered, holding a small wrapped package. I have something for you, she said. A graduation gift. I took it, carefully unwrapping the paper to reveal a leather-bound journal, its cover soft and worn with age. Open it, she encouraged. Inside, in my mother's familiar handwriting, was an inscription. For Ethan, the story of your beginnings. The pages that followed contained her journal entries from the time she'd met Kieran through my birth and early months, the story of my parents falling in love, their excitement about my arrival, their dreams for our family. I kept this hidden from Conrad all these years, she explained. It was the one piece of our past I refused to let him take from me. She touched the journal gently. I thought you should have it now, to know how much you were wanted, how much you were loved. I hugged her tightly, the journal pressed between us. Thank you, I whispered. When we separated, she wiped her eyes. Kieran's waiting downstairs. We should go before we're late. The graduation ceremony itself passed in a blur of speeches, name-calling, and ceremonial walking. But what I remember most clearly is looking out from the stage to see my parents sitting side by side in the audience. Not as a couple. That chapter had closed long ago, but as two people united in their pride for their son. Kieran whistled loudly when they called my name. My mother cried. My friends' families, who'd heard the condensed version of my story, added their applause to the chorus. Even Derek's parents had brought a congratulatory banner. Way to go, Ethan! Large enough to embarrass any teenager. After the ceremony, we gathered in the school courtyard for photos. Kieran stood on one side of me, my mother on the other, both beaming. I'm so proud of you, Kieran said, squeezing my shoulder. We both are, my mother added. Then, Derek's mother offered to take a picture of the three of us together, our first family photo in 18 years. As we posed, I felt the weight of everything that had brought us to this moment. The separation, the lies, the plastic bag in the rain, the car that appeared like magic to change the course of my life. Smile, Derek's mom called, and we did. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. Not by a long shot. We were still figuring out how to be a family, how to navigate the complexities of our shared history. My mother was still in therapy, working through the aftermath of her marriage to Conrad. Kieran was still learning how to be a father to a grown son rather than the little boy he'd missed raising. And I was still processing it all, still waking up some mornings confused about where I was, which life I was living. But we were trying. Together. And that was more than I'd ever had before. Later that evening, after a celebratory dinner with friends and their families, the three of us returned to Kieran's house. Our house now, I supposed. My mother announced she'd be looking at apartments soon, feeling it was time for her to stand on her own 2 feet again. Kieran supportively offered to help her find something close by. Their relationship had evolved into a careful friendship, bound by their shared concern for me rather than any romantic rekindling. As we sat on the back deck watching the sunset, I reflected on everything that had changed in the past few months. The plastic bag that had seemed like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of something truer, more authentic than anything Conrad's house had offered. "Penny for your thoughts?" Kieran asked, noticing my contemplative mood. "I was just thinking about that night," I replied. "My birthday. How everything fell apart and came together at the same time." My mother winced slightly at the reminder, but didn't look away as she might have once done. "Sometimes," Kieran said, thoughtfully, "it takes a storm to clear the air, to wash away what isn't real so you can see what is." I nodded, thinking of the rain that had soaked me to the skin as I'd walked away from Conrad's house. "That plastic bag was the best thing he ever gave me," I said with a wry smile. "If he hadn't thrown me out that night, who knows how long it would have taken for us to find each other." "Conrad's cruelty became your liberation," my mother observed. "And mine too, eventually." "And now?" Kieran asked gently. "Where do we go from here?" I looked at both of them, these imperfect human parents who had made mistakes, but were trying so hard to make things right. "Forward," I said simply. "Together." As darkness fell, we remained on the deck, talking softly about the future, my college, plans, my mother's tentative steps toward independence, Kieran's sabbatical next year to finish his novel. Normal family conversations, the kind I'd always envied in other homes. Eventually, my mother went inside to make tea, leaving Kieran and me alone beneath the emerging stars. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" "For never giving up. For making a room for me even when you didn't know if I'd ever see it. For being ready when I needed you most." Kieran's eyes glistened in the dim light. "Being your father is the greatest privilege of my life, Ethan. Even from a distance. Even when it hurt. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Inside, we could see my mother moving about the kitchen, her figure silhouetted against the warm light. Outside, the night air carried the scent of pine and possibility. "You know," I said thoughtfully, "Conrad always told me I didn't belong in his house. He was right about that, at least. I belonged here all along." Kieran smiled. "Not just in this house, Ethan. In this family. Our family. Broken and rebuilt, but stronger for having been tested." As my mother rejoined us with steaming mugs of tea, I felt a profound sense of rightness settle over me. The storm had indeed cleared the air, revealing truths long buried beneath years of deception. The plastic bag that was meant to humiliate me had instead set me free, leading me straight to the father who had never stopped searching, and the mother who had finally found her courage. I had been thrown away, but in the process I had been found, and in being found I had discovered the most important truth of all. I was never unwanted. I was always loved. The storms had passed, and in their wake, I was finally home.